Have you ever, really thought about words? Do the words we use actually reflect what they're about?
It's a question that has haunted philosophers for ages. And today, we're going deep into one of the most famous attempts to grapple with it.
Plato's Cratylus. Buckle up, folks. This one is a wild ride through the philosophy of language.
So right off the bat, we're hit with this idea of the correctness of names, orthotes ton and automaton, which was like the question in ancient Greek.
And not just for proper nouns, right?
Exactly. It's about all words, common nouns, adjectives, even those tricky verb forms.
So it's not just why we call this guy Socrates, but why the word wisdom seems to fit the very idea of wisdom.
Right. Is there something inherent in the sound, something that just clicks?
Yeah.
Or is it all, made up?
And that tension, that's the heart of the Cratylus.
We've got Hermogenes, our champion of convention. He's basically saying, look, words mean what we agree they mean.
Simple as that.
Pretty much. Like, we all agree justice means fairness and rights, but we could, in theory, decide tomorrow that justice now means, I don't know, the feeling of being pleasantly surprised.
Wow, that's trippy. Suddenly justice is all about those unexpected moments of joy.
Exactly. For Hermogenes, it's all about convention. We decide, and that's it.
Then we've got Cratylus in the other corner, and he's all about naturalism.
He thinks there's this inherent connection, like the word water somehow has a waterness to it, a natural fit.
So for him, there's some deep link between the word and the thing itself, not just arbitrary sounds.
Right. And smack dab in the middle is Socrates, our philosophical referee, prodding both sides and trying to get to the truth of it all.
The thing about the Cratylus is it's this oddball in Plato's work. It's like his only dialogue that's completely dedicated to language, right?
Yeah, it's unique. You don't find him diving this deep into language anywhere else.
And it doesn't quite mesh with his other big ideas, like the theory of forms, as we usually think about it.
That's what makes it so fascinating. It's like Plato is exploring this less charted territory, pushing us to think about the very tools we use to think.
So let's break it down. Hermogenes, our convention guy. What's the gist of his argument?
Well, he's really hammering on the idea that the meaning of a word is entirely dependent on our agreement. You remember that example of water suddenly meaning joy?
Yeah, that was a mind bender.
That's exactly the kind of flexibility Hermogenes is talking about. For him, it's the act of giving a name, of imposing it through collective acceptance that makes it correct.
I mean, it makes sense on a basic level. We learn words because people tell us what they mean.
Right, it feels intuitive. But of course, Socrates doesn't let it slide that easily.
He jumps in with this tricky question, right? He says it's possible to have true and false names.
Yeah. Now that sounds weird when you first hear it. Like, how can a name be true or false?
Like, is chair true? Or is table false? It doesn't quite make sense.
Exactly. And the placement of this argument in the text has caused some head-scratching among scholars. But a charitable reading suggests he's not saying names themselves have truth values like statements do.
Oh, so it's not about the name itself, but how it relates to the thing it's naming.
Exactly. It's more like the name chair is true of this object if the object actually is a chair.
So truth applies to the relationship, the connection between word and reality.
Right. And it kind of prefigures some later ideas in philosophy, like how Quine thought about reference.
Okay, so even if we agree on a name, it can still be applied wrongly, right?
Absolutely. So then Socrates brings in this other big idea, Protagoras' famous line about relativism. However things appear to me, so they are for me.
Whoa, that's hardcore relativism.
Right, and Socrates is essentially asking, does Hermogenes' view on names lead to this kind of overall relativism about reality?
Like, if good just means whatever I agree it means, does that make goodness itself totally subjective?
That's the question. Interestingly, though, Hermogenes kind of waffles. He's attracted to relativism, but ultimately backs off.
So even he sees the need for some kind of objective ground, some reality out there.
Right, and Socrates drives this home with his argument about virtuous and wicked people. There has to be some standard of morality beyond just opinion, right?
Yeah, if everything is just relative, then virtue and wickedness mean nothing.
Exactly. So he establishes this idea that objects have some stable being of their own, a reality that language can then try to accurately grasp.
Okay, reality isn't just a figment of our individual imaginations. There's something solid out there.
Now, the link back to Hermogenes is subtle. Not everyone agrees that conventionalism about language must lead to relativism about reality.
But it's a tempting thought, right? If words are just arbitrary, does that make the world itself arbitrary?
It's a question worth pondering. Well, let's move on to the tool analogy, one of Socrates' most famous arguments. He compares names to tools like saws or plows. What do you make of this?
Well, a tool has to be fit for its purpose, right? A saw has to be good at cutting wood. A plow needs to be designed for the soil.
Exactly. And Socrates argues that if actions have a correct way of being done, then the tools for those actions must also have a correct way of being.
It's like using the wrong screwdriver. You're just going to strip the screw, right?
Precisely. So he says that speaking and naming is an action.
Okay, like when we name something, we're doing something in the world. It's not just passive labeling.
Exactly. And to do it well, we need the right tools. And those tools are names. So names also have to be fit for their purpose.
So the question isn't just, do people understand this name, but is this name actually good at naming?
Right. He's saying that a good name isn't just about convention, about people understanding it. It has to be intrinsically suited for the job of picking out and separating the different kinds of things that exist.
He uses this phrase, separating being, right? Ousia in Greek.
Yes, that's a crucial concept. He's talking about how names help us carve up reality to distinguish between different kinds of things. Like when you say tree, you're separating trees from bushes, from rocks, from everything else.
Right, you're picking out a specific category based on its shared essence. It's like drawing a mental boundary around a certain kind of thing.
And that's what he means by separating being. Naming is about identifying and articulating those shared essences, that underlying treeness that makes all trees trees.
So because this act of naming is aimed at something objective, something real about the world, the tools we use the names have to be objectively suited for that purpose.
Precisely. It's not enough for them to just be sounds we've agreed upon. They need to be carefully crafted instruments for picking out and describing the different kinds of beings that exist.
Okay, so this leads to the idea of the lawgiver, the one who creates these names.
Yes, the nomothetes. Socrates argues that to craft these tools effectively, you need a skilled expert, someone who looks to the essence of the thing being named and then creates a name that's naturally fit to represent it.
He even talks about the form of the name as if there's some ideal way for a name to capture the essence of a thing, almost like a blueprint.
It definitely echoes the theory of forms, although it's not a direct one-to-one mapping. It suggests there's more to a good name than just arbitrary sounds. There's some ideal structure, some optimal way to capture the being of a thing.
It reminds me of how Plato talks about the craftsperson who has to understand the form of the thing they're making, whether it's a table or a ship.
Precisely. The lawgiver is like the master craftsperson of language, shaping names to perfectly fit the forms of the beings they represent.
So in this view, a good name is like a precision instrument, not just a label flapped on something.
And it's the philosopher, the skilled dialectician, who's equipped to judge whether a name meets this standard of natural correctness.
So philosophy isn't just about thinking about the world, it's about having the right linguistic tools to do that thinking accurately.
Exactly. It's about having a language that can carve nature at its joints, as the saying goes.
But then Hermogenes, ever the skeptic, asks, okay, so what is this natural correctness? How do we actually determine it?
Right. It's all well and good to say names should be naturally correct, but what's the measure?
And to illustrate this, Socrates brings up the name Astyanax.
You might remember him as Hector's son from the Iliad, but Socrates uses it more as a general term for king.
And he breaks it down etymologically, right? Like Astyanax comes from words meaning town lord.
Yes, and he argues that this etymology reveals something essential about kingship. The king is the town lord, the protector and ruler, so the name is correct because it captures that essential function.
So the correctness here comes from the name's inner meaning, its roots.
Exactly. It's about the name pointing to or indicating Delon, the shared being, the ousia of the thing it names.
So he's basically saying, for names that have a deeper etymological structure, that structure should reveal something true about the essence of what's being named.
That's the idea, what some scholars call anati. But, and this is a bit awkward, a lot of Socrates' etymologies are just plain wrong.
Wait, really? That's kind of a problem for his whole argument, isn't it?
It's a big point of debate. Why does Plato, the master of logic and argumentation, include these obviously flawed etymologies?
Maybe he didn't know they were wrong.
That's possible. Or maybe he's deliberately showing the limitations of etymology as a way to get at philosophical truth.
Like a subtle jab at anyone who thinks you can just look up words in a dictionary and suddenly understand reality.
Exactly. But regardless, it does make you question how much weight to give these etymologies.
And then we get to this whole extended etymological section. Socrates goes on this huge tangent, analyzing all these different words, and it gets very Heraclitean, doesn't it?
It does. He starts finding all these connections to Heraclitus's ideas about flux and change. Like oret, meaning excellence or virtue, he links it to that which always flows.
He's finding this hidden philosophy of constant change buried within the very words themselves.
Right. He even suggests that many words might be built up from just a few basic roots that refer to motion and process, like ion for going, rheon for flowing.
So it's almost like the Greek language is predisposed to this Heraclitean worldview.
It's an intriguing idea, and this whole section raises the question of what Plato's doing here. Is he just illustrating Nate?
Or is he subtly critiquing it by showing that it leads to a view he doesn't agree with?
Or is he doing something else entirely? It's up for debate.
And there's another wrinkle here, this distinction between exegetical etymology and philosophical etymology.
That's a key insight from scholar David Sedley. Basically, Socrates is mostly doing what we might call exegetical etymology, trying to figure out the actual historical roots of words.
Like a historian of language, even if his guesses aren't always accurate.
Right. But later on, Cratylus starts using etymology to make claims about reality itself. That's philosophical etymology.
So for Socrates, it's more about exploring the history of language. But for Cratylus, it's like a direct window into the nature of reality.
Exactly. And the whole section kind of warns us about the dangers of philosophical etymology. You can easily end up with a distorted view of the world if you're not careful.
It's like reading too much into the origins of words without actually looking at the world itself.
Right. Now, some people think Socrates' etymologies are just jokes. Like he's deliberately being absurd to make a point.
It wouldn't be unlike him to use a bit of irony.
But others think he was serious as anyone could be about etymology back then. It's hard to say for sure.
Okay, but let's get to the heart of it. Socrates eventually admits he can't explain all names through etymology.
Right. There had to be some basic primitive words that aren't built up from other words, the first names.
So how does he explain those?
He brings in this whole other idea, imitation. These simple names can't be explained by etymology, so he says they must be correct by imitating the things they represent.
So like onomatopoeia, words that sound like what they describe. Buzz, hiss, that sort of thing.
He talks about sound, but he's more focused on what he calls articulatory imitation. It's about the physical movements of your mouth and tongue when you pronounce a word.
Like how the shape your mouth makes somehow resembles the thing being named.
Exactly. He thinks certain sounds inherently resemble certain qualities, like the rolled R sound in Greek rho resembles movement, he says, while the short I sound iota resembles something small and piercing.
And from these basic resemblances, you can build up more complex names that imitate more complex things.
Right. He even sketches out this idea of an ideal language where a wise lawgiver would systematically create names based on these resemblances.
It's a pretty wild idea. And some of his proposed connections between letters and things are, well,
outrageous and ridiculous, as he puts it himself.
yeah, exactly. It makes you wonder if he's serious or if he's just pushing this idea to its limit to show how absurd it can get.
That's the big question. Some people think it's a reductio ad absurdum, a way of showing that imitation can't be the whole story.
It's like he's saying, okay, if we take this idea all the way, it ends up with me claiming that the letter R sounds like a rolling stone. Maybe we need to rethink this.
Exactly. But others think he's at least partly serious about imitation playing some role. It's hard to know for sure.
And then we get to this moment where Cratylus, who's been pretty quiet up to this point, suddenly goes full-on naturalist.
Yeah, he takes Socrates' ideas and runs with them even further than Socrates himself seems comfortable with.
He's like, yes, natural correctness is everything. Convention doesn't matter at all.
Right. And he lays out these three pretty radical claims. First, he says that a name is either correct or it's not a name at all. There's no in between.
No room for error, huh?
Nope. Second, he says correctness is solely determined by this natural fit, either through etymology or imitation.
Convention is completely out of the picture.
Gone. And third, and this is the most extreme, he says incorrect names can't even be applied to an object. If a name doesn't perfectly capture the essence, it's literally meaningless.
Whoa, that's a bold stance. Like if I call a cat a dog, I'm not just wrong, I'm literally saying nothing at all.
Exactly. It's a pretty extreme view. And even Socrates is like, whoa, hold on a second.
He uses the analogy of pictures again, right? Like, I can use a picture of a man to represent a woman even though it's not a perfect match.
Right. So even an incorrect name can still be used to refer to something, even if it's not the ideal name.
So that pokes a hole in Cratylus's claim that incorrect names are just empty sounds.
And he also uses the picture analogy to argue that some correct names can be better than others. Like, a perfect replica of you wouldn't be a picture of you. It would just be another you.
Right, so resemblance comes in degrees.
Exactly. So some names might capture the essence of a thing better than others.
And then we get to this really crucial argument, the sclerotes argument. This is where Socrates brings convention back into the picture.
This is a turning point. He argues that if we can show that a convention helps a name indicate the being of a thing, then that convention must contribute to the name's correctness.
So even if there's some natural element to the name, if it's our agreement that makes it actually work, then convention matters.
And he uses the example of the Greek word for hard, scleron.
Claron, okay.
And remember how he said the R sound row imitates hardness?
Yeah, that rolling sound.
Well, scleron has a row in it, but it also has lambda, which he associated with softness.
So it's got both a hard sound and a soft sound.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet we all agree that scleron means hard. It's not the sounds themselves that are doing all the work here. It's our convention, our agreement that this particular word means hard.
So convention trumps those supposedly inherent natural sounds.
Right. And from this example, he concludes that convention definitely contributes to the correctness of names.
He even brings up the names of numbers, right? Like, why is 7 called 7? There's nothing inherently 7-like about that sound.
Exactly. It's pure convention.
But then his final statement on this is a bit ambiguous. He acknowledges that convention matters, but he still seems to think there's something to this idea of natural correctness.
It's a famous ambiguity. Scholars have been debating this for centuries. Does the sclerotes argument mean Socrates is now a full-blown conventionalist? Or does he still hold on to some kind of modified naturalism?
It's like he's leaving the door open to both interpretations.
Right, and that's what makes the Cratylus so endlessly fascinating. It doesn't give you easy answers.
Okay, so in the final stretch, the dialogue shifts to this idea of the power of names.
Dynamis in Greek.
Right, dynamis. And Cratylus is still clinging to his hardcore naturalism. He says that analyzing names is the only way to get at true knowledge about reality.
He's basically saying that philosophical etymology is the key to unlocking all the secrets of the universe.
That's a pretty big claim.
It is. But Socrates pushes back, arguing that etymology can only tell you what the ancient name-givers thought about reality. And they could have been wrong.
So just because a word has a certain etymology, it doesn't mean that etymology reflects some deep truth about the world.
Right. It could just reflect a mistaken belief.
And Cratylus defends himself by saying that the name-givers were really consistent in their worldview, which was basically Heraclitean.
Like, if they all agree on the same basic picture of reality, then their etymologies must be onto something, right?
But Socrates points out that consistency doesn't guarantee truth. And he even finds some etymologies that suggest non-Heraclitean views, so even that consistency is questionable.
Right, and he brings up this really clever point.
Yeah.
If all knowledge comes from analyzing names, where did the first name-givers get their knowledge? It creates an infinite regress.
Like they had to have some other way of understanding the world before they could even create those first names.
Exactly. So Socrates concludes that it must be possible to learn about things without names.
What do you think he means by that?
Well, some people think it's about some kind of mystical intuition. But a more plausible reading is that he's emphasizing the importance of direct experience in reason. We can't just rely on words. We have to actually look at the world itself.
It's like the difference between reading about a tree in a book and actually going out and seeing a tree, touching it, feeling the bark.
Exactly. And this leads him to his final critique of radical Heracliteanism. He argues that if everything is constantly changing, then there can't be any stable knowledge.
If nothing stays the same, then there's nothing to actually know.
Right. And he appeals to the forms here, these eternal, unchanging realities like the beautiful itself, the good itself. If even those were in constant flux, then knowledge would be impossible.
It would be like trying to build a house on shifting sand.
Exactly. So he rejects the idea that everything is in constant chaotic change. There has to be some stable ground for knowledge.
And he leaves the dialogue with this call for continued investigation, but without relying solely on etymology.
And Cratylus, still clinging to his Heracliteanism, just walks off. The dialogue ends with this unresolved tension.
So in the end, the Cratylus doesn't give us any easy answers. It's more about raising the really deep questions.
Right. It forces us to think about the nature of language, the relationship between words and reality, the limits of etymology. It's a philosophical puzzle box.
And for all of you listening, we're left with this lingering question. Where do you stand on this debate between nature and convention?
Is there something inherent in the words we use, or are they just tools we've agreed upon? And what does your answer mean for how you understand the world around you?
If you're ready to dive deeper, we highly recommend checking out the Cratylus itself, as well as the tons of great scholarship that's been written about it. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is always a good place to start.
Keep those philosophical gears turning, everyone. And until next time, happy pondering.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.